In the last decade, violent crime all over Britain has been rising.
There's a 23-year-old male.
With murder, stabbings and gun crime at record levels. The public wants something done, but how do we get it under control? My name is Chris Daw QC, and I'm a barrister who defends those accused of committing serious crime.
And I'm Ayesha Nayyar, a solicitor who represents victims of crime. Chris and I both have very different views on how to solve this crisis. The criminal justice system needs to get tough, and it needs to get tough fast.
I, on the other hand, think Ayesha has got it all wrong.
The get tough on crime approach to criminal justice is a myth. It doesn't work. We're doing that now. What we need is different answers. I'm going to show you what they are.
In this series, we will both be trying to convince you which of us has the stronger case. By hearing from the victims.
I'm still struggling daily, I'm still going to hospital, whereas he's done his time and expects a normal life.
Spending time with professionals on the front line.
The last thing that we want to do is be telling a loved one that, you know, their family member, son, daughter, husband, wife, brother, sister, isn't coming home tonight.
And even meeting reformed criminals who have committed serious crime.
Nice to meet you.
Same here.
You have to be prepared for violence at all time. I was always prepared because obviously the life that I lived.
At the end of the week, we'll be putting our cases to a specially assembled jury.
What can we do as a collective to make things better?
Who will be asked to deliver a verdict on a question that matters to us all. Crime, are we tough enough? What is the purpose of prison when it comes to solving our crime crisis? Does prison exist primarily to punish those who've committed crime or to rehabilitate them back into society? And how long should people be sent to prison for?
I have a very straightforward answer to these questions.
The majority of people I meet think prison is a cushy number. It's somewhere where they go to have a break. We need prison to be a real punishment for everyone we send inside. We need to get tough. Porridge should mean porridge.
I, on the other hand, disagree.
But I've been to prisons over many, many years, and prisons are just warehouses for criminals. They are universities of crime, and they make the situation worse and worse. We end up with people with a revolving door who go into prison and come out more sophisticated and more dangerous than when they went in.
Today, Ayesha and I are hitting the road to talk to witnesses and gather evidence, including a mother whose son was murdered by someone out on licence from prison.
The government are not sat there without a son. The government are not sat there without a daughter. We are.
I go inside a prison where the emphasis is on rehabilitating offenders.
We can't do anything about victims that these lads have created. And what we can work towards reducing them, creating more victims.
And a notorious former Manchester gang leader tells me why prison certainly isn't a holiday camp.
How can it be a holiday camp if you're away from your loved ones? Do you know, like, people take freedom for granted. When you go to jail, you realise how valuable freedom is.
There have never been more people in prison than there are today. In fact, since 1993, the numbers have almost doubled. And yet, despite that, crime keeps going up and up. It's led me to the conclusion that prison doesn't work. But there's also another myth about prison, that they're holiday camps where prisoners live the life of Riley. This too is nonsense, but don't take my word for it.
Well, today we're going to see Darryl Laycock, who's an old client of mine from over 20 years ago, and he spent over a dozen years locked up in some of the highest security prisons in the country. And he has a story to tell which I think is going to contradict the myth of the prison as a holiday camp, as somewhere where people are just having fun, hanging out with their friends on their PlayStations and watching TV. He's going to tell us the true story of what it's like to be behind the door for up to 23 hours a day. So today we're going back to probably one of the most iconic prisons in the country, which became famous for rioting back in the 1990s, Strangeways Prison in Manchester.
Her Majesty's Prison, Manchester, nicknamed Strangeways, is a perfect example of the sort of grim institution I feel has had its day. Darryl and I first met here back in the 1990s, when he was widely considered to be one of the most feared criminals in the northwest of England. Back then, I was defending him. Today, having spent over a decade locked up, I'm glad to say he's turned his life around and is now an award-winning anti-crime mentor for young people. But he still remembers life on the other side of these high and intimidating walls only too well.
So, when was the last time you were behind these walls?
Last time I was behind here was, in strange ways, was 2001, after getting a sentence for 8 years.
So most people who've never been to prison would just assume that it's a really frightening place. Is it frightening being in jail?
It is for the average Joe, and first-time offenders. It's very, very frightening. You know, very intimidating when you're walking on the wing and someone's shouting over the balcony, fresh meat and so on. But people like me, who was a seasoned criminal, I always had people inside the place. But you know what we've got to remember? You know these kids that have got beef with people on the street, people, you know, in gangs and crews and whatever, on the out, people can run and hide. In jail, you can't run and hide. Do you know? You're backed into a wall.
So is basically violence could happen any time?
Right, yeah. You have to be prepared for violence at all time. I was always prepared because obviously the life that I lived.
Beyond the violence, however, it's the sheer unrelenting boredom that Darryl recalls. In fact, there was only one thing he looked forward to.
It's very, very boring. The only highlights I know is when somebody jumps over the balcony and gets on the cage and the screws are trying to get them off the cage. Everybody's goading him on, spurring him on, and everyone's laughing at the fact that he's on the cage, which is like
entertainment.
Like netting. Yeah, that's about as much entertainment you're going to get in prison.
But more than the conditions in prison, there was one thing that Darryl found hardest, and it's something we often take for granted.
So apart from not having your freedom, the freedom to go wherever you want, whenever you want, what's the worst thing about being in prison?
Not being yourself, not being able to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Do you know, like, people take freedom for granted. When you go to jail, you realise how valuable freedom is, you know. You can't go to the shop when you want, you can't go to your brothers, your sisters, your mums when you want, you can't go and visit your mates that might have passed away in the cemetery when you want. It's a regime, innit? You're locked behind a cell door.
And trust me, if a high-profile prisoner like Darryl feels this way, then those without his connections have an even harder time. Over 100 people killed themselves in British prisons last year. I want to know if Darryl has an insight into why that's happening.
So we know from media and all of the reports that levels of self-harm and suicide and violence in prisons are higher than they've ever been. What is it about life in prison that makes it so much more dangerous for the people on the inside, and you get so many people harming and killing themselves?
What it is a lot of people suffering from mental health issues, what shouldn't be in prison, and are not getting the treatment that they're supposed to be getting. And basically, that's when they're harming themselves, and unfortunately, some of them actually commit suicide. But the conditions in most jails are Victorian, aren't they? So it's not going to help anybody be comfortable in it. You're going to be uncomfortable.
While Chris and his former client give you what I consider to be a very one-sided view of life behind bars, I want to show you that it's not the whole story. Far from it. I've come to Alt Course Prison outside Liverpool, a place that prides itself on being one of the new generation of institutions that focus on rehabilitation rather than punishment, which, as you know, isn't my idea of proper porridge. And once through security, it's clear, at least to me, that this is a long way away from the sort of place Chris and Darryl have been talking about. It's much more open than even I was expecting. And I'll be honest, it's even got nicer flower beds than I've got at home. Inside, meanwhile, the inmates appear to be walking around, chatting in their own clothes. And there's also this, a huge football pitch. It's hard to tell if you're in prison.
Are we in the prison now? Is this the prison?
Yeah, this is where prisoners have free movement. So if they're going to education or maybe they've got a doctor's appointment, then they're allowed to leave their work area or their house block and make the way. That movement is planned and scheduled, so they'll have a movement slip Can't just go where they want.
That's a big football pitch. Who plays there?
Prisoners from different units, so they have their own gym time. Some of that gym time, maybe that they work in the actual sports centre themselves. But we do have competitions between
Prisoners
staff.
and prison officers?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Dare I say it, who wins?
Well, they win. They're better footballers than us.
Time to go inside. And first, I'm shown a very special residential wing called the Family Intervention Unit. Here, the idea is to help inmates become better fathers and husbands. Prison officer Billy Bennett explains the philosophy.
Billy, tell me about the Family Intervention Unit.
OK, this unit holds 60 people, 60 men. We carry out several courses for these men. There are 18 of us staff that manage this unit, but we also manage visits as well. This gives us the opportunity to interface with their families. We deal specifically with helping these lads improve relationships with their families.
And how would you do that?
Well, some people don't know how to communicate. They can be quite argumentative. They don't want to listen. Some people don't want to tell their partners when things aren't right. We help them with that. We have courses that are specifically geared around that. We also bring families in and the lads can cook for them.
Here?
Yes, we have 2 fully serviceable kitchens upstairs.
OK, so are they allowed to bring their families
They bring their family into the prison. They go up the stairs into the kitchen area. There's a big dining facility for them too. They can cook a meal for the family.
Might be the first time we've ever done that.
Well, absolutely, yeah. And again, this removes this stigma that's attached to, oh, where's my dad? Where's my husband? You know, they'll only know what they see on television.
What's the ultimate aim? What are you trying to achieve when these lads go back out there?
OK, whilst they're with us, we're giving them time to think about not only what they've done, the reflection of what they've done, and the impact it's had on other people. And ultimately, hopefully, they'll take that on board, and when they leave us and go through the rest of the process, it'll stop them from reoffending.
I've been given the chance to speak to one inmate here on the family unit. I'm meeting him in his cell, but we're keeping his identity a secret.
This is your cell?
It is. This is my home away from home, yeah.
And how many hours a day are you in here?
You're in here 12 till 1, so 1 hour in the afternoon, 5 till 6 while they do another count, and then from 7 p.m. until 7:30 a.m. you're in here. How
homely can you make somewhere like this?
Well, I mean, it's no home, but it is your home. You've just got to make it the best you can while you're in here. So everything that you see in here, I've got to buy out my wages that I earn. If I didn't follow the regime, I don't earn any wages, so I can't buy these things, I can't have a TV. So it forces people to engage in the prison regime.
And you've got access to a phone. Do you have access to the internet as well?
No, there's no internet access. Every cell in this jail has an in-cell telephone, but you can't just pick it up and phone anyone. It's a set of pre-approved numbers that security have okayed, and you've got set times of the day where the phone is not, you can't use the phone after 11 o'clock and before 7 a.m.
It's a bit cramped in here. Should we go and have a chat outside?
Yes, yeah. Sure.
Come on. How long did you get when you were sentenced?
I got sentenced to 7 years, which means I would serve 3.5 years in custody and then another 3.5 years on licence.
And you've got family on the outside?
Yeah. This wing, say the core values are being a family man, so it offers things that other wings don't offer. So focus is the children, where it's more relaxed than a normal visit, and you'll be able to get up and have the children sitting on your knee where you can't really on a main visit. So when you come on the wing, you'll be invited to a family intervention programme, which is like a 3-week course on learning basic parenting skills. Some lads don't know how to be a dad, so they'll teach you how to speak to your kids, how to listen to your kids, basic nutrition, all things that you need to know when you're a dad.
From a child's perspective, it's a tough place for your dad to be.
Yeah, and it's not their fault that we're in here, but they suffer.
Yeah, the punishment is for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So it's about just bringing them involved, saying that they're still part of our lives and they've made a mistake, but we're still their parents.
Do you feel by changing your ways and everything you've learnt while you're in here that you're giving your kids a positive role model for when you come out?
I was very selfish on the outside, which has brought me here.
As well as the Family Intervention Unit, there are other programmes in Alt Course designed to help rehabilitate the prisoners. First, Dave is showing me where they teach the inmates new skills.
This is where we do all our fabrications, so they'll make locks, gates, bars, not just for this jail, but for other prisons.
Oh, so it's a working area?
Oh, yeah, it's a proper engineer's workshop.
What is it? You're actually a prisoner, aren't you?
Yeah.
And what do you do here?
We just do the welding, we make the skips, do jobs in and around the prison, making shelving for different units, and just general jobs that we're doing around the prison, but the majority of it is the skips.
Next, I get to see the computer rooms where prisoners are getting the chance to gain qualifications.
This is the IT classroom, so he'll take lads with very little experience with computers and some with more experience, and depending on what level they're on, that's where they will slot in. So you have on the board there, we have from basic ICT right the way through to advanced.
And they're taught here, so do they come out with qualifications?
They do, yes. You can get a qualification quicker in this room than you can if you go to college outside. Because college outside is a couple of hours a week, maybe for a year.
Yeah.
They can do the same thing here within 2 months.
Well, so this
is full-time.
This is full-time. So this just feels like they're coming out of the living quarters and they're coming to college. So this is almost like being at university, isn't it?
It is, yeah. We do have some lads who are doing open university degrees while they're in prison, which they pay for themselves.
And there are even facilities for spiritual enlightenment.
Do you have all types of religions here?
Yes, we have the Muslims, we have pagans, we have Buddhists. I think at the moment the only one we probably don't have are the Jedis, but we'd accommodate them as well if we did so.
Finally, I get the chance to see something I definitely wasn't expecting to see in a prison. Therapy birds. Yes, you heard me correctly.
You've got birds of prey in a prison?
We have 13 birds, from hawks to buzzards to owls and a little tiny kestrel. They will sit there all day and not hunt, and it became a therapy programme, so we work with lads who are maybe on an act booklet, who are self-harmers, poor coping skills, mental health issues, and we'll attach the appropriate bird to the lad.
I'll be honest, the more I see of Alt Course, the more it leaves me in two minds. On the one hand, seeing the family unit, as well as the workplace and educational opportunities being offered, I can see why focusing on rehabilitation could be a good idea. But then there's the luxury football pitch, the gardening and the pet birds. Well, that doesn't send the right message for me. What would victims of crime think?
If I brought a victim of crime in here, what do you think their view would be about the way these prisoners are living?
That's a difficult one. I mean, we can't do anything about victims that these lads have created, but we can work towards reducing them creating more victims. We're always conscious that whatever we do takes the victim perspective, because they do want to see some form, for want of a better word, some form of punishment.
Yeah, they do. Victims do want punishment.
Yeah, that's what they want justice, don't they? Yeah, and I can understand sometimes that people say that the prisoners get this and we don't have that outside. Prisoners don't get anything unless they have earned it.
Back on the streets outside Strangeways, I'm getting Daryl's take on this based on real experience.
A lot of people say, you often hear in the media, that prisons are holiday camps. You've been in a lot of prisons over many, many years. What do you say about that?
It's definitely not a holiday camp. How can it be a holiday camp if you're away from your loved ones? It's definitely not. People think you get TV and PlayStation and things like that, but there's an IEP system, incentive and privileges, where you have to work your way up to get them things. It might take a year, 2 years, and then you have to save up each week to buy it.
For me, more prisons need to adopt the Alt Course rehabilitation model, and too few of them are. Instead, many of them are simply universities of crime, where prisoners are going in and coming out more accomplished criminals than when they were sent down. That can't be a good strategy. I wonder what Daryl thinks about this.
The prison system, it's not making them better, is it? Because there's no rehabilitation, you know, limited education spaces, limited courses, prevention, no prevention whatsoever. So yeah, people are gonna go on and commit more crime, you know, because they're not giving anybody any employment experience, employment training or anything to get a job when they come out. I think most people are set to fail when they're in jail.
If the government came to you with all the experience you've got of being in jail and said, what should we do differently? What are the things that you would tell them? How would you change prison for the better?
I'd tell them to put people on apprenticeships while they're in jail, because a lot of people are stuck in workshops getting paid £10 a week, making up sofas. You know, they need to be given proper wages, and then people have got something to come out to and got a skill and a trade to come out to.
In the last few years, Darryl has not only given up a life of crime, but begun to mentor those young people who might go down the path he did. For me, this is how you prevent crime, not making people afraid of prison. All of which leads me to one last crucial question.
So a lot of people say that the way to get tough on crime is just to lock people up time and again for as long as possible. You were one of those people. You were locked up time and again. You spent time in 17 prisons. You spent over a decade in jail. Did that stop you committing crime? What was it in the end that made you turn your life around?
Jail don't stop nobody, like I keep saying. What stopped me was tragedy in my family, to be honest. And then I realised I had to be out there. I couldn't be behind a jail door. I couldn't look after my family from behind a jail door.
We can see that prison in this country is not working. These Victorian monstrosities are universities of crime. They are factories and depositories for human misery. They are achieving nothing. Crime is going up. Murder rates are going up. Violence and knife crime on the streets are going up. We need to have a radical new solution to criminal justice in the UK, and we need to think about emptying these Victorian places once and for all.
Back at Altcourse, I'm coming to the end of my own prison stretch. And I'll be honest, being here has made me think about what we want out of our prisons. I can see the positives of rehabilitation, but are we in danger of forgetting that prison is supposed to be about punishment? To help me get some more perspective, I'm sitting down with the man who runs the place, Director Steve Williams. Thank you, Steve, for letting me have a look around the prison today. It's certainly given me a lot of food for thought. What would you say is the purpose of Altcourse? What are you trying to achieve here?
So ultimately, what we're trying to achieve is deliver what the court has set out, which is a prisoner needs to come to a prison. So it's about making sure that they're in a safe, decent, secure environment. So that's our first and foremost aim. After that, what we try and do then is have a philosophy of trying to prevent the next victim. So by doing that, what we need to look at with the prisoner is what are their needs, what do we need to do to them to make sure that they don't reoffend. And by doing that, we're keeping the public safe, and we're also making sure that the prisoner's in the best surrounding that they can be in.
What would you say to people who want prison to be a punishment? Porridge should mean porridge.
I mean, the punishment is coming here. It's about being away from your family. It's been about not being able to choose what you want to do day in, day out. So that's the sort of punishment of what a prison does. Yes, you could lock them up more, but for me, if you fundamentally do that, you lose that likelihood of trying to make an impact on their life, to make them have a more positive behaviour when they go back out in the community. So for me, prison is a punishment because me personally, I wouldn't like to have my liberty taken off me. I like to be in control of my life, and I like to, obviously, to see my family. So by them not having that, that's the punishment. Once we get them here, then it's about trying to re-educate them on the way that they should behave and act in the public.
Sadly though, in this country, prisons are often revolving doors. How can we stop that?
I think for me as a prison director, the main issue we always have is short sentences. I think, you know, there's times where we get people into the prison, but we don't have enough time with them to change their behaviour. So that's one aspect, is look at the shorter sentences and see if there is a need to not, you know, perhaps give them a community sentence instead of sending them to prison. I think the other aspect is to look at maturity levels of the prisoners that are being sent to us. Sometimes they're just not mature enough to take on that change in behaviour, and it can be quite difficult with some of those prisoners. And hence, with the younger element, you do have a revolving door approach. But most prisoners, if they're first-time offenders, you've got a real chance of stopping that revolving door approach.
Thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
And you. Thank you for coming.
Well, I'll be honest, coming here today, I was pretty set in my ways in terms of what I wanted a prison to be and look like. And actually coming to Alt Course, I think I've softened that approach. I can see a lot of positive benefits to come out of the rehabilitation programmes that they're offering in there. And it does make me think, if prisons across the country could do this, would we have less reoffending, which is what I want for the victims.
A crucial part of any trial process is cross-examination, where each side gets the chance to question witnesses from the other side of the argument.
Which is why, as we build our cases, Ayesha and I will be sending each other to meet those people who might just change our minds. First up, she reveals where I'm going.
I'm sure Chris had a great time catching up with one of his old clients, but he needs to go out and meet the victims of violence. So I'm sending him to meet one family who've had a horrific experience and they want fundamental change urgently.
Chris, meanwhile, is sending me somewhere quite different.
I'm not against sending the most dangerous and violent people to prison and keeping society safe from those people, but 69% of people sent to prison have committed no violent offence at all. And I'm going to send Ayesha to meet one of them, a lady who was sent to prison, not even for a crime, but for not paying a bill. And I hope when Ayesha hears her story and the tragedies behind it, that she might just change her view on this.
Some on the get tough side of the crime argument say, if you can't do the time, then don't do the crime. And that when it comes to prison, we should lock people up and throw away the key. But what if there is a miscarriage of justice? Chris has arranged for me to meet Melanie Woolcock, who he feels experienced just that.
Melanie, tell me about your situation.
Being on a low income, and what a lot of people don't know, I did not pay it. I fell behind for a couple of weeks, and a warrant was issued for my arrest for not paying the bill.
At that point, how much did you owe?
£110.
A warrant for your arrest, and you only owed £110?
Yeah. And I paid it, and then 3 days after I paid it, I had bailiffs at my door saying, you haven't paid it, off you go to jail.
The reason the bailiffs arrived at Melanie's door was because she was deemed to have defaulted on her overall debt to the council, and they wanted the full amount urgently.
So it was 7 a.m. and you got a knock at the door?
Not a knock. They were kicking the door in.
And what did they do when you did open the door?
When I opened the door, I said, you're not coming in. I've paid the bill, which I had at that point. And I said, you're not coming in and you're not taking me anywhere. But of course, I rang the council at 9 o'clock. Fair play to the police. The police came and they said, look, give the lady a fair chance now. She's paid the bill.
Yeah.
And I phoned the council and they said, it doesn't go into your account for another 48 hours. So I said, well, 48 hours, I gotta go. So I went.
Who was at home at the time?
Me and my son.
And how was he?
Oh, he's hysterical.
And no wonder, because Melanie was told she was going straight to jail. She was petrified.
Melanie, tell me about your first night in prison.
Horrendous. You think your whole life has collapsed around you. You're sitting in a 4 foot by 4 foot square room, and that's your life. I left my son, and obviously he went to live with his dad, which was great. But if you didn't have that, I spoke to people in there who were mothers. The minute you go into jail, your kids are taken away from you. It's awful.
What were the other prisoners like?
To be fair, I felt sorry for a lot of them. And there was one lady, she said, I've been in prison 26 times. I said, you're kidding me. I said, I never want to be in here ever again in my entire lifetime. Why are you back? And she said, I'm homeless. Who in their right mind wants to be in this environment? But she said, I haven't got any other environment.
What's the single worst thing that happened to you when you were in prison?
Being isolated. You're completely isolated from the outside world. Absolutely heartbreaking. You have no contact with the outside world unless, I think I was in a wing of 78 people, had to have 4 officers to accommodate that amount of inmates. And if they rang in sick, you're locked up.
You sound like you're still really traumatised by this experience.
Oh, big sigh.
Do you think about it a lot?
I try not to, but I do.
But there was one final twist in Melanie's case. She'd been imprisoned under a law designed to prosecute those who'd willfully neglected and willfully refused to pay their council tax. As someone who'd merely defaulted on her debts, she should never have been locked up. She was released after her lawyers launched emergency procedures.
The day comes, Melanie, when you're finally released from prison. How did that feel?
I was absolutely elated. But when I came home, because I came home to my house, I couldn't adjust to the peace, because I live in a cul-de-sac, nice street, everything. I was pacing up and down, waiting for somebody to tell me to do something. Because in prison, you're regimented. You're awake at 8 with an alarm bell. You're told at 8:15 what to do. You do it by 8:30, and you're in a complete regimented regime. I came home, I didn't know what I was doing.
Well, Melanie's case for me is a sign that we are far too eager to send people to prison. But Ayesha is sending me to investigate a case that shows the opposite. Some people should not be out of prison at all.
Today I'm going to meet the family of a young man who was tragically killed in a knife crime attack a couple of years or so ago, and really want to understand their point of view about what's wrong and what's right with the criminal justice system.
I'm meeting Gary and Leslie Hoolican at the scene of their son's murder to hear their story.
Can you tell us what happened?
Well, Michael had gone out for a few drinks, ended up coming to this pub, which was a pub that he never really come to. There was an altercation outside with a girl. Someone went in the pub and said, "This girl's been punched to the ground." So Michael and a few lads come out, and he said, "What are you doing? You don't hit women. You don't hit women." Anyway, there was an altercation with Michael and this lad, and as Michael thought he was punching him, he was stabbing him.
And the ambulance came here?
The ambulance came here. We got a phone call about 11 o'clock off a barmaid that works in another pub, telling us that Michael had been stabbed.
We didn't think it was going to be as serious as what it was. When we arrived at the hospital, we just couldn't believe it. They wouldn't let us see him at first. Then when we did see him, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't. No. They induced, put him in a coma. And unfortunately, he was like that for 3.5 days, and they told us they couldn't do anything else.
When Michael passed away, he left behind his mum and dad, 3 brothers, and his own 4-year-old son. His murderer was this man, 21-year-old Timothy Deakin, who was out of prison on licence, having served half his sentence for a previous assault conviction. During his trial, the Hoolican family discovered that Deakin had been arrested whilst out on licence and failed a number of drug tests. Back at the family home, Michael's brothers, Gary Jr. and Christopher, have joined their mum and dad to tell me how they reacted to these devastating revelations.
Dealing with just the fact that Michael had been killed must have been hard enough, but I think you found out fairly quickly about the person who'd actually killed him, Timothy Deakin, and his history. What did you hear? What did the police tell you about that when they discovered who'd killed Michael?
I just couldn't believe that someone who was prolific as him was out on the street.
We kept hearing, you know, after the event as such, we heard that he was a bully, picking on people, he was continually pinching, he was arrested, he was being brought back in but let back out. Even the police have said at various venues, at hospitals and things, he says, we couldn't believe it, he's walking down the street again now. We only arrested him the other day, you know.
But what was your reaction though, when the police said to you, look, you know, he's only been out of prison a few months, and actually he's still on licence from another attack on someone else, because I think he pretty much bit someone's ear off in a previous attack.
Yeah. It makes you think, why is he out?
Well, he shouldn't have been out, should he?
Walking the streets if it's that bad.
I'm sure your point of view would be that had he been recalled to licence, or had he had to serve more of the sentence that he was given in the first place, that he never would have been on the streets. He wouldn't have been outside that pub.
He wouldn't have been on the street. My son would still be here, you know.
It's like he was allowed to do what he wanted, if you know what I mean.
In the end, Deakin was found guilty of Michael's murder and sentenced to a minimum of 27 years in prison. But the family's experience of the criminal justice system has led them to believe that things need to change radically so others don't end up in their position. Christopher thinks that prison should be used more.
If you get caught with a knife, it should be put away, and it stop people from carrying knives. If you did that, like put people away for carrying knives, it'll stop a lot of people from going out with a knife. You know what I mean?
Dad Gary, meanwhile, thinks it's simple. We need to keep bad people in prison.
I think the probation are told not to recall them because the prisons are full. And my answer to it is build more prisons, because you can't have these people on the street. You know, they seem to be ruling the roost for everyone. And it's not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. I mean, you find out his history and it frightens you.
And Leslie thinks we need to adopt the ultimate punishment.
The system's just let this lad do what he wants. Put him in for a bit, let him out, and it's wrong. It's totally wrong, because they're not the ones that's living without their baby son and their brother, and it's horrible. And we've got to live like that forever. We're the one that's missing him all the time, and it's horrible. And you just feel as though they're not doing anything about it, because it's still going on. There's stabbings after stabbings after stabbings after stabbings, and it makes me so furious, because the government are not sat there without a son. The government are not sat there without a daughter. We are. We've got the life sentence, none of them have. Me personally, I think they should bring hanging back. No, I do. You know why? Because I think that will frighten them. I think they'll think twice, oh God, I better not take a knife out. Because I feel as though it's like, take my keys, take my phone, and I'll take a knife.
It's just like a habit.
Yeah,
that they do.
That's how I feel, and I think they're not doing enough about it.
The hooligans have provided powerful testimony which challenges my point of view. It's my firm belief that simply locking people up and throwing away the key doesn't work. But if they'd done that with Michael's murderer, he'd still be alive today.
You can't help but listen to that family and see their faces and the tears, and come away with a really very different appreciation of what knife crime means. I mean, we read about it in the papers, and I go to court and deal with these cases, but when you actually sit in the home of people whose son's been killed in that way, it really is shocking. And of course, in their case, it could so easily have been avoided. And you know, there's a huge question mark as to how Michael's killer came to be on the streets at all. He had already been locked up for biting someone's ear off, and yet he had come out of prison and broken the rules and even been arrested, and yet wasn't sent back to prison under his licence conditions. And you have to say, if there's someone like that, if there's a doubt about whether they're safe to be on the streets, should we be letting them out at all?
Back in Wales, Melanie and I have escaped for some fresh air on the beautiful Bridge End seafront. Now I want to find out how she's coping on the outside.
How are you rebuilding your life?
My son is absolutely fabulous, but he suffered, you see, when I went in.
Did you deserve to go into prison?
No, not at all. I was in with murderers, rapists, heinous crimes. And a month before I went into where I was, Holloway in London was closed and they were all shipped into the prison where I was. Nobody deserves to go to prison unless they've committed a crime. I did not commit a crime. I shouldn't have been in there.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with me. Oh, give us a hug. I wish you well.
Thank you.
Chris sent me to meet Melanie because he thought her story might change my mind about our overuse of prison when it comes to the fight for justice. I'm ending my trip to Wales thinking he might just have a point. Firstly, is it right that prison is being used to punish those who can't afford to pay a bill? Secondly, when we say let's lock them up and throw away the key, we need to be aware that miscarriages of justice do happen. And finally, should those who are in for lesser offences really be locked up with dangerous and violent people? Maybe prison does need to be reserved for the worst crimes.
Today's evidence gathering is complete. What are our closing statements when it comes to prisons?
Just locking people away and throwing away the key, as many people want, is not a part of the society that I actually want to live in. But in the end, even worse than that, it doesn't work. It actually leads to people becoming more criminalised and going back to prison for even longer. And that means more victims. As I heard from Darryl Laycock, who spent many, many years in jail, and in the end, it wasn't the prison that reformed him.
No amount of jail or no amount of conditions would have stopped me reoffending at that time.
Of course, prison needs to be used for the most violent and dangerous individuals, but it doesn't need to be used for the weak and the vulnerable. And I think after Ayesha met Melanie Woolcock, she's come round to the same point of view.
Did you deserve to go into prison?
No, not at all. Nobody deserves to go to prison unless they've committed a crime. I did not commit a crime. I shouldn't have been in there.
Everything I've heard has just reinforced my view that the use of ever longer prison sentences is an absolute disaster for the criminal justice system and for our society. We don't want to end up like they have in America, with 2.5 million people permanently locked up and whole sections of society completely out of circulation indefinitely. That's not the society I want to live in, and it's not the way we should be going in our criminal justice system.
I, on the other hand, feel my case has been strengthened.
Look, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying prison should be a hellhole. I'm just worried these modern prisons are going too far the other way, and there were parts of Alt Course that did worry me.
This is where prisoners have free movement, so if they're going to education or maybe they've got a doctor's appointment, then they're allowed to leave their work area or their house block and make the way.
Fair's fair. I do admire their ability to rehabilitate the prisoners that they have, but prison also has to be a place of punishment, and there was nobody better than the Hooligan family when they spoke to Chris to articulate that point.
The system's just let this lad do what he wants. Put him in for a bit, let him out, and it's wrong. It's totally wrong, because they're not the ones that's living without their baby son and their brother, and it's horrible.
It comes down to one thing. If in doubt, don't let them out.
Next time on Crime, Are We Tough Enough?
Oh my goodness. That's been bought. It looks brand new. Where would you get hold of something like this?
Nice to meet you.
Same here. Why are you here? How long have you been here?
Been in here for about 2 years now.
Right. And when you came in, how old were you?
16.
What kind of questions are you asked by the children?
Sadly, I've been asked, where's a safe place to stab?